Good morning, everybody. We may as well start straight away. Steve will be here in a minute. Declarations of interest. We have none.
Chairman, change of item, whatever one it is. I'm an employee of the Five Islands Academy.
Okay. Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Could I have a proposer for the minutes, please? Councillor Williams, seconder. Councillor Dean, all those in favour? Fine, thank you. I have no urgent items. So we come to agenda item 2. Oh no, sorry, 4. Yeah. Wrong page open. Can everybody make sure that when they're talking they speak right into the microphone? So I'm a bit deaf in one ear this morning, I'm afraid. Children and Families Update Report. Could I ask Joel, please, to present this paper?
Do you want me to kick off, Anne, or?
Oh, or did you want to present it? Usually Joel does. I didn't know whether you would like to do it this morning.
Just do a slight introduction, then I'll take you through it.
Shall I kick off?
Just a really slight introduction, I'll do it then.
Oh, I don't know if I've got some notes. Great. Do you mind if I go through my notes? I first wanted to recognise the recognition of Councillor Bedford. I believe healthy debate is driven by different points of view, and I think Anita, particularly on some of our post-16 conversations, gave strong and constructive challenge. So I'll miss her input on various things, but especially children's services work. Before us today, we've got various appendices that relate to the priorities of 2024 and 2025. And as we near the end of 2024, I just wanted to reflect on some of the progress we've made as an authority and as a partnership. We've had 2 Ofsted monitoring visits in 2024, both at the start of the early part of the year. Both were generally poor, both were disappointing, and resulted in a catalyst for change. We've commissioned a SEND test of assurance through the Local Government Association, which has highlighted weaknesses across the partnership, as well as some opportunities that we can improve our services on. There have been numerous positive and not so positive post-16 meetings and representations. And we've welcomed some new staff members and said goodbye to others. At a strategic level, we have a new director, we have a new head of service and 2 new social workers who've refocused frontline casework and moved our services forward. At an operational level, we've seen a significant increase in the level of casework which is taking place, which is reflected in the report we've got today. And very recently, we've commissioned our Mosaic case management tool, which will allow us to provide much better information and support to staff and to families going forward. We've had regular steering and improvement board meetings as we've sought to address some of the findings from our Ofsted inspection, and these have very much influenced our direction of travel. And certainly from a personal point of view, I would say in the last 3 or 4 months, I've seen a sort of significant shift in the way certainly the steering group, that some of the sort of partners have coalesced around some of the challenges, and I think we've started to make some real progress, certainly at the last 2 improvement steering group and improvement board meetings. Our Belonging and Inclusion group is also helping to shape our SEND improvement work, and that will carry on going forward. Recent feedback from a DFE visit and our annual conversation with Ofsted have generally been encouraging. The DFE notes are in our paper and our pack today. And then looking ahead to 2025, I just wanted to talk about some of the challenges which are not insignificant. Early in the new year, we can expect our 3rd monitoring visit, and I'm sure we all want to see significant improvement when they report back to us, and I'm very optimistic that will be a positive experience. The proposed staffing structure, which is in our report today, and budget go hand in hand. I know there's a significant budget pressure for the staffing structure, and I've asked the Chief Executive, having had feedback from other members, about a specific or very much a focused workshop on that, because the figures are much larger than we're used to dealing with. Beside the budget pressure are also potential budget reductions in the forthcoming budget. And while I appreciate savings across the council have to be made, I want to make sure they're shared broadly and across the whole of the community, with no particular area targeted or made more isolated. I anticipate significant progress being made in the next 12 months against some of the Ofsted improvement work, some of our SEND work and some of our post-16 work. Action plans have been produced, and I anticipate the RAG ratings on these improving as we go through the next 12 months. We know that various policies need revision, and work is underway to try and address some of this. We've also done a piece of work around some of our procurement and commissioning. We found that some isn't fit for purpose and some isn't delivering good value for money. I think we need to probably address our whole council-wide approach to commissioning and look at how the whole sector, but particularly in children's services, adds to the sum of the parts. I expect over the next 12 months to see improvement in our youth offer in a holistic sense, and also in our use of funding to address some of our alternative provision challenges. Finally, to help pull some of those strands together, I hope that in line with our corporate plan aspirations, we can create a partnership-driven children's plan which has a wide sense of commitment, accountability and vision for our future.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
It's a really eloquent walk through the papers today. I don't have anything to add, but just a massive thank you to Councillor Williams as my lead member, and happy to take any questions.
Right, any questions? Just going to start questions. Councillor Dean.
Yeah, got a few. There's a bit in here that says you've helped to reinstate the statutory community safety partnership. Yes. I didn't realise that had lapsed, which is a bit shocking to find out that had lapsed and that you've had to reinstate it. So that's disappointing but pleasing as well at the same time. You've also got in here that the proposed children's services restructure is going to be decided in January 2025, which in my mind is before the budget is set. So that's a question. And along those same lines, the restructuring and the new recruits for your service, are you able to put a figure on that, financial figure on that? Because I'm a bit worried that we're stretched financially anyway, and if the budget for that is too high, then we might suffer. Other services might suffer.
Okay. So, forgive me, it's a typo saying it'll be decided in January. It's up for discussion. It has, the issue of the restructuring has been a point of topic for the last few months, really. Forgive me, Councillor, I haven't got the exact figure in front of me, but I'm more than happy to supply that in the aftermath of this meeting today. There was another question you asked there. I lost it.
I can't remember.
Oh, about community safety. Yeah, no, I think it was a change of staffing that resulted in it just having a bit of a lapse. I'm really pleased that we've got it back. It's starting to get back on track again. Community safety is really important in terms of the marriage between vulnerable people and community safety. And you will know, because I've talked in this forum a number of times before around some issues to do with drugs and alcohol in the island. So community safety is a key component part of how we drive forward some really good practice.
Okay. I'll carry on. I can't see any other lights. So I've got another question. It's about the post-16 offer, predictably. So I'm pleased to see that you've had some productive meetings with Truro and Penrith colleges and Cornwall College. I did ask at the full council meeting back in September whether it was worth approaching some of the state boarding schools across the country to see if we could negotiate a better deal for Isles of Scilly residents. I don't know if you've done that. If not, why not? And could you? Because we know that some parents will always prefer to use state boarding because of the oversight of their children out of hours of college, so the supervision of that. So that's a question.
So a direct answer to the state boarding, whether we've approached other state boarding schools across the country, no, we haven't. It wasn't in part of our post-16 plan. I'm quite happy to take that one away and have a conversation with Russell about that. I think our plan and our approach about 16 plus has been quite clear the whole way through. So it's not a no, it's a how. The usual route would be where parents choose to place their child in a state boarding school that's outside of, our approach is about trying to keep our children as close as possible, then, happy to step in and support their application in that way. And as you'll know, the state boarding schools, the majority of them also do bursaries for families.
Okay, just one more question for me for now. We talked before about the possibility of some kind of accommodation provision within Cornwall, in conjunction with the colleges in Cornwall. I wonder if there had been any progress on that.
Yes, I mean, I will bring back to you a progress report as we go. Just a little reminder, it was the 17th of September that we had the approval through full council to kind of get off and running with this plan. We've got a number of things in the pipeline. We're currently negotiating with a provider about the potential. But yeah, I don't want to say too much about that until it's a bit more concrete, really. And certainly our relationship with the principals of Truro, Penrith and the Duchy of Cornwall colleges has just gone from strength to strength. I will take the opportunity to just also update members that, part of our engagement with the community through the community college, really, has been really good. We're really pleased. We've written to all of the 16 plus households in the last 24 hours, just to kind of update people that we've got about 10 new host families interested, and we're currently going through the process of DBS and a range of other things that we've promised to do. So it's still very early days in this plan.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Thank you. I think the post-16 is coming to our March scrutiny, one of the March scrutinies, in a bit more detail. Okay. Councillor Sims.
Yeah, good morning. Paragraph 3.3, it says awareness raising has led to a 137% increase in referrals. So that's a big increase referrals. Yeah, it's on page 3.
Yes.
What I was wondering though, is that sort of an increase from 4 to 9? I mean, it's clearly not, or is it more? I mean, it's clearly not an increase from 400 to 900. Is it just the absolute numbers? Are they sort of? It's not really indicative, you see.
So one of the issues for us is to always try and be a little bit sensitive around numbers. And what I would say to you is what we're trying to show you there is that the service is busy. We're working with the right children for the right reason. So it's significantly more busy than it was before.
Yeah, because I mean, what I took from that, and I think it's quite heartening, is that it appears to be a system that's broadly working now, whereas prior to that, I think arguably it was a system that wasn't working. There was a latent demand there which nobody picked up. And there was another point which I cannot find for the life of me at the minute. It was to do post-16 pathways or something, and it was just a small little bit there that it said that it wanted to be picked up early by their 16th birthday. Well, that sort of works fine if you're born in November. But if your birthday's August the 23rd, like a couple were when I was at school, you're a bit high and dry, so you've got to go away in two weeks after that. I just wondered if you could.
So
it needs to be a point of the year, I suppose, to perhaps their birthday. That's what I think. Okay, thank you.
That's okay. So thank you for noticing the increase in work. I think we are now providing professional children's services to the families on Scilly, and I think it's, we talked some months ago about the importance of building confidence, about lifting the kind of sense of Scilly silence that people don't feel able to come and be supported in their hour of need, really. So I think we're now doing that for families, and I think there's a lot more to do. In terms of the 16th birthday, absolutely. Our 16 plus plan, as you'll know from previous conversations we've had, we want to get up front of this from the age of 14, not from 16. But we have to use the language of 16 plus just because that's about 16 plus education rather than planning.
Councillor Peacock.
A couple of points. Page 4, 4.2. Really pleased to see that you've managed to get a youth hub up and running. And that's really good news for the islands, I feel. While work to establish a dedicated youth hub is underway, are we any further forward with that project?
So, thank you, Councillor Peacock. We're really pleased at stepping up the youth hub, and we had, you'll see in my paper, we've talked about Xavier, who's been appointed as our Strengthening Families for Youth practice lead. In fact, Xavier and Verity were both on training last week, so I covered the youth hub, really. It's really fun to be able to do that as a director. Helps you to talk directly to children, which is a really nice thing to do.
Yeah.
And my thanks go to Jack, who runs the Your Town Inn. He's an outstanding member of this community who's really stepped forward for children in my experience. But, you know, it's still early days. Our youth hub is a bit youth club-like, and that's great. The aim is that we'll get under the skin of a bit more thematic issues with young people, thinking about all the things that challenge teenagers and how we can work with them. You know, we're really keen. We've got some really creative ideas about what we would like to call a belonging and inclusion hub that actually would also in future deliver both our alternative provision and be a very multifunctional, agile space, both for all things adolescence and celebration of youth, as well as alternative provision. So I'm working really closely with Nicola and with Russell to really think about how we might be able to deliver that on the islands. But it's very much in the thinking stages at this point.
Right. So on page 5, you say become a care-ready island.
Yes.
Would you just like to flesh that out a little bit? What do you mean by care-ready?
Sure. So we'll know that currently we don't have any children that are formally looked after by the council, as in be a child in our care. Lots of places have nice language about that, around children we care for. And the islands haven't had the experience of Isles of Scilly children being in our care. But that's not to say that we won't, or we might not in future, or indeed we might not have a fostering offer, maybe not to the children of Scilly, but actually why can't this be an amazing place for lots of other children? So part of the care readiness is also part of our statutory duties. You know, just because it hasn't happened to date doesn't mean to say that it can't. And we were really lucky enough to have somebody called Mark Riddell, who came over to work with a whole range of partners and with yourselves. And the aim is that we will be fit for purpose should we need to look after children of any age for any reason that means that they're not able to live with their family.
Right. And finally, in the letter from the DFT, no, it's not DFT, DFE, sorry, got DFT on the brain, a day job, sorry. Letter from the DFE, on the second page, it talks about areas of concern, one of which is around partnership working, and I presume you're all over that, and hopefully you're moving forward on that.
Yes, I mean, that was a concern to us. It was a good conversation when they were here. And of course, that is a review of, in fact, it's a late review, so it's really an 18 months late review. You know, driving improvement in children's services is tough going, really. So it requires a lot of courageous conversations across partners and the pulling together. So that's certainly something that's uppermost in our minds and in the minds of partners.
Thank you. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just, well, no questions, but I'd like to compliment Anne for the quality of the report, and also it's littered with, or surfeit of acronyms all the way through it. And I struggled for ages to find out what EHE stood for, and I now know because I reached the bit at the end which said glossary. Brilliant. And I wish every author of reports would include, if they do include a lot of acronyms, that they put a glossary at the back. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. Councillor Sims.
Sounds to me like you prefer it at the front, though. I was just going to mention I didn't mean to mention the youth club before, and I think that's really, really good. And what I really wanted to do was just give a shout to Jack at Old Town Inn, because he's been so
Outstanding.
useful for these people coming over from the mainland and making our lives better. I mean, in loads of ways, he's been, not just with the youth hub, but theatre club and various things. He's been a real lifesaver for the island. So I just wanted to mention Jack at this point.
I think that's really important for us to do that. We would not have been able to step up the youth hub had it not been for Jack and his staff, actually.
I clearly meant the staff as well, but
yeah, he's got
Jack's the only name I can think of.
Yeah, he's got a couple of members of staff who've, you know, just by having the youth hub up and running, have started to talk about their interest in working for children's services and public service, really. So, yeah, I'm really, really impressed by him.
Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, just want to dig down into paragraph 3.3. So it's just cross-referencing the increase with the performance stats at the end of the pack. And it says in there that children's social care received 19 contacts in quarter 2 compared to 8 in quarter 1. That's the 137% increase, is that correct? What sort of, what's driving, apart from, what sort of issues are driving those increased contacts? General themes, obviously.
So it's always a challenge, isn't it, Dan, when we're sat in a public forum to talk about some of that, really, and try and be respectful to our families. There are a range of issues that are happening for our children. There are some issues that are about family difficulties. There's some stuff around adolescence and the challenges of adolescence. You know, these islands didn't have children subject to child protection planning beforehand, and we now do. So there's a plethora of issues. There's some issues that border on, you know, domestic disputes. So if you'll forgive me, Dan, that's as bland as I'm going to be about that in a public forum, just because I'm keen to be respectful to people.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I just wanted, because we've got a paper obviously on the housing crisis as well, and I just wanted, you know, as councillors, we need to be able to draw those themes and those issues and link them up together and try and produce a coherent strategy rather, to ensure that we're spending public money in the best way that we can to make people's lives better.
100%. And then, so just for some assurance, there have been a few issues to do with housing matters, really. And where, in terms of what we would talk about in children's services, is section 17. So the statutory requirement to support, to fund some of that as a result of some of our housing stuff. And I'm happy to talk a bit more outside of this meeting about that.
Okay, cool. Also, it's good to see a kind of a first punt, if you like, on the structure you're proposing in the thing. So I noticed that there's quite a lot of red in some of the RAG ratings and stuff, and that's due to people posts not being filled and things like that. But like Joel said as well, I'm wary of just the affordability and sustainability of how children's services, of what we agree as members going forward, and the implications of that. I know we want to make services as good as possible and be as effective as possible, but we have to do that within a financial envelope as well, and there are other services that we provide. So I just want to make sure that there is robust challenge to how children's services is being planned out in the future, and how we can make sure that the rest of the council is sustainable as well, because we can't concentrate on one thing, because one area, because other areas will come and distribute, and it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. We don't have enough money to spend on housing because we spend on children's services. So it's just, I just want to make members aware that in your priorities, I think the end of Appendix A, talk about secure permanent staffing structure. I don't want to be held to that for a structure that you've got here, because that might change once we get proper costings in the budget. And I want to be also reassured that you are working with Ofsted to make them aware of the financial and operational constraints that we've got here. So some of the ideas that I know of that I always know with compliance, some of the idea, it's really hard to work with mainland structures over here because things are more expensive because we've got more expense. So I wonder, has that flexibility been spoken about with Ofsted?
So there's so much in what you've just talked about, Dan, and I guess what's happening for the Council for the Isles of Scilly is the same debate as what's happening in every other local council across the country about the cost of the people-based service, whether you're talking about children's services or adult care, and our statutory responsibility as a council to fulfil the duties. Now, there are some, I believe that this structure, and it's been run through the Local Government Association, is, and I wouldn't be presenting it to you if I didn't think that that was a structure that would fulfil our statutory duties. And you are absolutely right, cost is a really significant factor. I've sat in Scrutiny before and you've asked me, you know, what will it take to get permanent members of staff here? Some of that's absolutely been built in to the staffing structure around what it would take to be able to have a permanent staffing structure that would cost less than is currently being spent on the interim structure that we currently have. Ofsted are really aware of the interim structure. Ofsted are not always interested in individual council budgets, and as a DCS 4 times over, I constantly talk to Ofsted about the cost of running the service. That said, and you'll see in my report that there is a section that talks about the need for us to, you know, really look at spend, and you know, we go into the territory of looking at what are the requirements, so what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-have issues, and this is never easy. I guess what I would say to you is I feel very responsible about the cost of the service that we currently spend and about leaving resilience in the long term. All of us are only ever as good as what we leave behind us, really. And my proposal on that structure is that actually it doesn't go anywhere near over and above what is the statutory requirements, really, of the council, and what will prevent this council going back into an inadequate status. And I think those are really, really tough decisions. And, you know, respectfully, I think my job is to help you make the best decision possible. And I absolutely hear you around all investment in one service can sometimes be really tricky for others. Every council in the country is dealing with exactly that issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our job is to provide friction for those ideas as well. So,
respectfully, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Yeah, I keep on getting reminded of things. I had a very, very busy day yesterday. I didn't listen to this until late last night. In the DFE letter, it mentions possible issues in the future when you move on or and other people come in. And I know that certainly that a part of the issue with the problematic Ofsted report was a level of complacency, which we see to, which is actually goes right through the island. It's a wonderful place. Nothing bad things don't happen here. So, and I just, and I must admit, I didn't go through it all that thoroughly, but I mean, I didn't see anything really about a ratchet effect for the cultural change to make sure it stays in place, which I think that was mentioned really in the DFT there, because this isn't, okay, we've got to get out of this particular issue now, but we've got to keep away from it forever really, and just getting that, stopping that complacency creeping back in, because it's quite easy here for that to happen. And I don't envy anybody the task of making that happen.
And respectfully, don't mind, I will respond to that. So it is about skill, knowledge, experience, and the right kind of background to be able to run a sustainable service over the longer term and meet need. I couldn't agree with you more. I think I spend a lot of my time in a space thinking about cultural norms, behaviours, having very courageous conversations, which are sometimes not comfortable, really. But, you know, I have been a director of children's services a number of times over. Those are the same conversations I've had in a number of other local authorities where we've been driving improvement. And it only lasts if you've got the courage of conviction to stay in the lane of improvement and don't do a quick fix financially and then not resource properly, which then results in a position of going up and down. And that's problematic for all councils, particularly problematic for children and families.
Thank you.
I just got a couple of questions. In our last meeting in September, Joel brought up about the effectiveness of the Joint Health and Wellbeing Board overseeing children's services. I wondered whether, I don't know if this is for you, Anne, or for Russell, where we are with the Health and Wellbeing Board.
Yeah, I can answer that one. As you're aware, there's a review going on looking at whether the Joint Health and Wellbeing Board, which we are a member of with Cornwall, and the ICP is functioning as it should do. There's crossovers between the two, duplication, and are all parties happy with the way it's working? We fed our experience into that. There is a piece of work at the moment looking at whether it would be better to split the Joint Health and Wellbeing Board back to a Cornwall Health and Wellbeing Board and a Council of the Isles of Scilly Health and Wellbeing Board. That is the way that the work is looking at the moment, with the recommendation how that then feeds the ICP process going forward. It's the Integrated Care Partnership for acronyms, I know. So that work is ongoing. Before any changes are made, it will come back and be a decision for full council here and full council in Cornwall. So no changes will be made without members approving those changes and agreeing to them.
Thank you. Safeguarding training. Joel, Tim and myself have had some safeguarding training for adults, and it was suggested that there was going to be a joint one. Is that in the pipeline?
I think we need to get it there quite quickly, don't we? It's been a really busy time, as you can see through the report, but, you know, part of the conversation I have with Russell is about members training anyway, and I think there's a plethora of members training that I hope we're able to stand up in the next 6 months, and certainly we want to put in a workshop at the early part of January for a range of things, really.
Thank you. And Mosaic, is that all up and running and complete now, or are we still getting to grips with it, or is it?
We're still sprinting, really. We've come out of sprint 1. We're in sprint 2. And actually, I'm pleased with the progress, but you know, it's not fully a fully fledged total system across children and adults at the moment. But all of our children's casework is in Mosaic. In fact, before Christmas, we were in the middle of building some of the performance structures that people have talked about up till now. And all of the work around care readiness and a range of other things will happen from Mosaic between January and March. So I'm really pleased with the progress that we're making. I would just kind of explain to people it's a really intense process when you're, on top of the significant volume of work that the service is working with. We're also implementing a big system, really, so it takes time.
I see you started a review of policies and procedures, which started in October. Is that progressing well?
Yes, we're right in the middle of it now. Just to, really important about what our policies and procedures are that are available to, on websites and available and in line with our model towards strengthening families. So it's a significantly big piece of work.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Yeah, a couple more things from me. So the workshop we had with Mark Riddell, just want to say how great that was. He was very inspirational. But you mentioned in your report that we will be receiving a report is forthcoming. I wondered if it had arrived yet, and if so, if has it arrived yet?
So just, and there's a couple of sentences in it that we just want a bit of clarity on from Mark. And as promised, as part of that, our DFE advisor, Claire Burgess, has been negotiating with DFE colleagues to look at some additional resource in order to help us to become care ready. So we're right in the middle of those negotiations now.
Okay, that's great. I think Joel mentioned it earlier, a specific workshop on the budget pressures on children's services. I would fully support. I think you mentioned that earlier, didn't you? And the final question I want to ask is a perpetual question, really. Your department has to deal with a lot of partners in, health, school, etc. And I think we're probably all aware that the school and the medical centre have had some pressures of their own lately. I just wondered how those relationships were at the moment. I know it's very difficult, always very difficult for you to get engagement from all the partners. Just wondered how that was going at the moment with their pressures.
So I think it's always a work in progress. Relationships are always interesting things. I think I was saying earlier on, we have to have such courageous conversations between us at times. That sometimes that, really great systems leadership is about being courageous enough to have those conversations and still stay together in the same priorities, really. And I'd say that's a constant work in progress.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions? We'll take the recommendations. Recommendation 1, that the contents of the report and the appendices be considered, and that the progress against the actions in the improvement plan are set out in Appendix C to this report be noted, and that the priorities are set out in the Appendix A to this report be endorsed. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Watt, seconder, please. Councillor Peacock, all those in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne. Let's go to agenda item 5. Housing delivery. Good morning, Nicola. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair.
Would you like?
I'll quickly go. I'll do a quick summary of the report. I won't go through in too much detail. As you know, we declared a housing crisis back in January 22, and this report recognises the need of partnership in finding those solutions, because we can't, as a council, solve the housing crisis alone. You'll note the increase in provision of staff accommodation that's noted in the annual monitoring report that went through council as part of the planning papers. And this is welcome because it decreases pressure on the housing market. In addition to this, the council, Duchy, Live West and Cornwall Community Land Trust have all made best endeavours to secure mainstream housing delivery over this period. But there remains a significant housing need that, if we leave that unmet, will threaten the future sustainability of the islands. The good news, I suppose, is that Live West now have their planning permission for 27 homes at the Carn Thomas Secondary School site, but delivery will depend on funding being released from Homes England, and a decision on that funding won't be known until March 25. And likewise, the council and the Cornwall Community Land Trust are trying to progress the Enna Farm site, still await a further funding decision that we wait until March 25 for as well. In the local plan period, we refer to it from 2015 to 2030, the need for 105 homes, with 16 permissions been implemented through windfall sites so far. The other good news, I suppose, is that the Duchy have permission now for 10 homes at Telegraph, and they intend to start on site in 2025. Live West hope to be on site in 2026, and then a farm again in 25-26. But delivery is still insufficient to meet demand. I suppose, and to me, the next steps really are around, we will need to review what land's available in the local plan to see what is deliverable and who might help us deliver that. We need to continue to lobby government for grant funding via Homes England. And we need to maintain that very positive planning policy approach that we have in our local plan. And of course, the council are now exploring housing delivery on the Park House site. There's no guarantee that we'll be able to take that forward yet, but at least we're exploring that as an option. So, you know, we declared a housing crisis. Have we solved it? Absolutely, we haven't. Are we doing the best we can at the moment? We are, but it is all dependent on funding, and 'twas ever thus, I suppose. And I think this recognition of the need for island weight and the cost of development on the island comes home to hit a lot. And when we looked at the Carn Thomas site and Live West developing their site, their cost of development is looking to be 3 times the cost of developing a home in West Cornwall, which in turn is higher than costs elsewhere in the country. So it just puts into context the challenges that we face in getting housing delivery on these islands. Chairman, on page 55, I've recommended that you note the findings and we have a discussion around any further actions you think appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Nicola, for the report. It doesn't make for very cheerful reading, I have to say. It's hugely frustrating. You know, we do have, the duchy builds going up at Telegraph and hopefully the Live West at the old school site and a farm has been problematic. But it all comes down to funding. As Nicola said, Live West is saying it's going to cost 3 times as much on that site than it does in Cornwall, which is absolutely terrifying and just demonstrates the problems we have in delivering housing over here. We have been constantly banging the drum and making the case to government. In fact, we've had 2 visits from civil servants in the last 6 months or so, making the case for our special case on the islands and the fact that we can never achieve value for money if they use the same matrices that they use elsewhere in the country. So we'll continue to do that. There is a bit of optimism. There is a spending review in March with the government, and we're hopeful and we're pushing that our special case and that funding will come forward to help Live West to deliver, and who knows, Farm as well, perhaps, which would go a long way to meeting our housing need. But as Nicola said, it's not enough, and the local plan review is ongoing at the moment, and I think we do have to be realistic and look at sites that are more attractive, if you like. The ones that are on the old local plan, some of them aren't very attractive. The ones around Old Town, around the airport, and Anna Close and Northston Close aren't easy. Nothing's easy over here, as we know. But I think we might need to be a bit bolder in finding alternative sites. Yes, I'll open it to the floor now for any questions. Thanks.
Councillor Williams.
I think Councillor Watt was before me.
Right, sorry. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm disappointed to read in paragraph 15 that the Duchy have concluded that the site at Carn Thomas Primary School is no longer financially viable. So any ideas of what is intended there? It seems it's a perfect site for building accommodation. I just wondered, just going to be left as it is for years, or are there any plans in view?
So I think the way the Duchy looked at it was without housing grant. So there are a number of options for that site, and I think it's one site perhaps we ought to do some more work on around future uses. There are a range of opportunities, including housing, that we need to explore. We're just collating some of the evidence that the Duchy have got at the moment around the site conditions and surveys to see if there's another way forward in terms of alternative uses, or whether it could come forward for housing with housing grant. But yeah, it's a site we need to put some effort into alongside the Duchy, because I think for the Duchy they've decided it's no longer viable for housing, and therefore it could sit vacant for a long time. So we are exploring alternative uses at this point in time with them.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I think when we declared the housing crisis in 2022, it was certainly the right thing to do. It prompted talk, it prompted meetings in here. It sort of got the community thinking, I think, in the right sort of sense and shape, and perhaps it didn't make a massive change, massive shift, but I don't think it did any harm. And as a council, I think I was pleased we put our money where our mouth is. We invested in I can think of at least 3 properties that we purchased. Some have been subdivided to make more housing and hopefully an asset for us in the future. The Khan Thomas planning permission is obviously positive, but as Nicola alluded to, until we've actually got spades in the ground, it's nothing we can get too excited about. The Enna Farm project is disappointing. I just sense some of the enthusiasm has waned from some of the people who were really keen to get spades in the ground there, so hopefully that won't die a death and might be reinstated. I look forward to seeing the work happening up at Telegraph in 2025. Every time I have meetings with the Duchy, with Robert and Russell and others, we talk about the empty properties. That seems a perennial conversation, and I sense some never will get the investment to bring them up to modern standards. So I don't know what the exit strategy is for the Duchy on some of those properties. I'm aware they've been doing work on some of the newer ones, which will hopefully come on stream soon, but I guess there's a role for us to keep putting some challenge on there. Chairman, you talked about public health and wellbeing board, and I think regardless of whether the Health and Wellbeing Board is a single or combined entity, I think there's a public health asset which I'm not convinced we really use as effectively as we can do. I know the Director of Public Health has reached out to you and me for more meetings in the new year, but when it comes to quality of housing and health and determinants of good health, housing is a massive factor in that, as well as safeguarding, as Dan alluded to earlier. So I think regardless of what we do around Health and Wellbeing Board, I think public health is something we just need to think about. I was going to ask you, Nicola, about the old museum site and if we're any closer to getting that back, because it's an eyesore, it's not going anywhere, it's not doing anything, it's a bit of a mess. In the housing emergency, we talked about housing task groups and Island Futures. I just wonder if they ever did anything. Russell can contradict me, but I never see any sort of real change, challenge, energy coming from Island Futures, and we've got so many future challenges facing us that it would be good to see if that's something we can consider. But from what I'm seeing now, the housing crisis is almost evolving into a recruitment crisis. Recruitment and retention of staff is getting harder and harder and harder. I see people on social media asking for housing for staff, and they just seem to get a bit of a reaction, shall we say, which probably isn't helpful to that particular case. But as an authority, paying significant sums for recruitment, up to GPs, to people doing some of the other work at the other end of the spectrum, it just seems to be getting harder and harder to recruit and retain staff. And it just strikes me that in 2024, 2025, it's really never been harder on Scilly to get a house or to afford to buy a house. The costs keep seeming to go up, the market keeps seeming to get smaller, and although there's some sort of little glimmers of light at the end of the tunnel, there doesn't seem to be anything we can really get too excited about just yet, so that's a bit depressing.
Thank you. Any comments?
Chair, I'll come back on. I think the old museum site is very much dependent on the signature for the main contract for the town hall. So once we've got the main contract for the town hall signed, so we're in the enabling stage at the moment, then that we will hopefully get the progress of releasing the lease on the old site, which would mean that can come forward and be put either on the market or we push it forward for affordable housing delivery ourselves. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel, I think, on the old museum site, and hopefully we'll have an update on that shortly. In terms of the housing task group, it did have one meeting, and I think it got everyone around the table. We had everyone from from health to education, etc., around the table, and it did turn out to be a bit of a moaning shop. So we knew what the issues were, but I think the spin-off from that was the realisation of the need for the Duchy to be more positive in their approach. And I think the bringing forward of the Telegraph site was a direct response to that meeting. So that housing task group, that group discussion that was on the back of the Islands for Islands Futures, was really around raising awareness about what others can do. And we did have discussions with the academy about whether they could directly deliver homes, and we had those fruitful discussions with the Duchy around what they can do to help. So it was a one-off meeting, but I think there were some positive impacts of that in terms of a response from the market. So that was useful. And I think the recruitment crisis is across all sectors, and I think there's a very strong case to make to government and Homes England around housing as infrastructure. Without housing, that's a core piece of infrastructure for the islands. Without housing, you can't do anything else. You can't commute to the islands easily. It's not like you can do a daily commute. So I think we need to probably do a little bit more work in terms of lobbying. And I know Russell's doing a significant amount of work with the MHCLG and the new civil servants there to raise awareness about the challenges we face as an island community, and in particular around the housing challenges and the cost of delivery. But I think that lobbying must continue.
Councillor Sims.
Yeah, it was quite nostalgic reading all the comments from that public meeting. But what I was going to say really is that we absolutely had a very, very solid housing crisis in January 22, and we were actually at that point, I think, failing even to tread water. It looked like it was going to move backwards, and we did quite a lot fairly quickly in April Cottage, Kirklees, and then Bosun's Locker. And so we got around that one really in a way, and nobody had to go to the mainland. But it's a similar situation now. But we declared a housing crisis, and then in a way the council went completely mute on it. We never really sort of said a great deal about what was happening and progress that was made, though progress had been made. And I think that was a little bit of a problem. And all these things are hopefully coming online in the not too distant future. It could be earlier. But I think the real crisis we have is not really the crisis we had in January 22 or the crisis we have now. It's in 10 years when the demographics of just the number of young people here is just insufficient to maintain the community. And I think that's going to be, it could be a death blow for the islands if you have very, very few people over here who are not working as opposed to retired. I mean, you could have half three-quarters of the working population looking after the other 25% who are retired. And it could, my principal issue here, I'm rambling now, I'm sorry. My principal issue here is we've got to get this resolved in the next 4 or 5 years to a reasonable extent, else we have real issues for the actual sustainability of the communities.
Any comments, Nicola?
I think that's right. And I think some would say probably that crisis is now. If you look at how much agency staff we need to use for Park House and for children's, we need to move as quickly as we can. And I think to me, it's funding. Without the funding, we can't move quickly. And I think we've done all the legwork. You've seen that on the Inner Farm site, on the Live West site. And as we're preparing for Park House, at the end of the day, it's all down to the money. And the viability of delivery on the islands is so challenging. So it really does boil down to, making sure government are aware of the specific challenges we have on Ireland. And we've already got a population in decline. We've already got a working age population that's smaller than that is sustainable even today. So in 10 years' time, if we haven't got these houses built, it's a pretty bleak picture.
I was really talking about tipping point, Nicola. I mean, we're not far off it. Yeah, I completely agree with you there.
Thank you. Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, a couple of comments on the report. Is Island Futures Board still in existence? Question. Is it going to meet anytime soon? Question. Is my first question.
It's something I've had a look at over the last couple of months on the basis of reinvigorating it. I've spoken to some of the key players. Hopefully I will get something started in the new year. That's the plan at the moment, but it had gone a little bit flat, I think, over the summer. And as I say, it needs a relaunch. And I've been speaking to a couple of the big partners on that, and that is what the plan is now.
Okay. Secondly, off islands, and obviously that's outside the council's control, because we don't have any council houses on the off islands apart from schools, perhaps, where we are with them now. But again, rambling. But I'm just aware of a number of properties on St Agnes that are either up for sale at a very high rate, with quite high duchy rents on. And I'm also aware of properties that are sitting dormant on St Agnes as well, and that's without looking around. And again, we need to be challenging the duchy as strongly as we can to get those back into circulation. There's a significant housing. I've got a member of staff who's currently not housed, wants to work with me full time, and there's no house for them. And thirdly, I'd like to ask the question, if you look currently at the houses for sale on St Mary's, there's a significant number of flats that were investments for people around holiday lets. And if you look back to when some of the significant houses in Hugh Street were converted, they were converted into holiday lets, which are no longer really habitable for long-term rental because they're too small. Is there any planning barriers to the size of a property that you can buy to let out for the long term? With the local plan review, can I request that that is seriously looked into? Because for me, if you were to buy one of those flats, it's too small to live in, but B, as well as that, it would be really awful if the local authorities' procedures and policies were actually stopping someone buying 2 flats and knocking them back into 1 if there's any sort of change of use requirements.
Nicola?
Thank you, John. First of all, your point about empty properties and the Duchy's approach to them, I think we have regular meetings with the Duchy, and Russell will correct me if I'm wrong, housing is one of the key issues, but I think if you've got specific properties, it'd be useful to have the names of those properties so that at the next regular meeting with the Duchy, they can be discussed in detail. So perhaps that we can take that outside of the meeting. In terms of holiday lets, of course, some, as you point out, some of the holiday lets that have been created are below what are called national space standards. So for something to be used for permanent accommodation, it should meet national space standards, but also other standards, HHSRS, don't ask me what that acronym means, decent home standard, and it should have appropriate EPCs, so energy efficiency certificates. So it's a challenge to bring some of those older properties back into current use, because as landlords, we have to make sure those properties are lettable. And you'll notice with places like Kirklees, April Cottage, we had to put a significant amount of investment into those properties to bring them up to the right standards. So the use of older properties is also a challenge, but there's also an opportunity. But again, it comes with it at a price that it's possibly cheaper to convert or bring back into use existing properties than new builds if you look at the cost of the building works. So I think we should keep our eyes open for opportunities. I think the local plan and the planning policy situation enables that to happen. So we have a very progressive local plan that allows that to happen, and a positive approach from the planning team. So there are opportunities there, and each one creates a solution. So even finding one answer, and from that public meeting, there was just a few annexes came forward. So anything in the private sector that comes away from holiday let into normal rental, into long-term rentals, is a good thing. So there are opportunities out there. Whether we publicise that or not, I don't know. Whether we encourage that use through support and guidance to people who want to make those investments, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, there's some opportunities, and I think with the changes to council tax and changes to government legislation around second homes, there may well be some further opportunities in terms of properties switching tenancy from holiday lets into long-term rentals. So I think we will see a slight change in the existing housing market.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, and further on to that, anything that comes, like Nicola said, comes through planning needs to adhere to the national space standards. So those are nationally mandated and agreed with the planning inspectorate as part of the local plan. Obviously, John, you're more than welcome to come on the local plan reform group. Every councillor is invited to that, so it's always good to get everyone's opinion on that. And I mean, to be honest, like Nicola said there, I'm quite happy with the way that planning has approached this, these planning applications over the last few years. I think we've been really progressive, been really open to working with people whilst still having to work within national frameworks and guidelines. So the minimum space standards aren't something that's set by us, they're set by central government, because they want to stop people living in bedsits, and they want to give people decent homes, they want to give people space to live in, so which I totally agree with. The only thing that I would say, you know, is when I look at this, it's like, what can the council control? What is in our remit to actually control? And planning is one of those things. The issue, you know, that we're coming up against, I think, and applicants will come up against, is things like BNG at the moment. All this extra cost and work that applicants are going to have for applications, which would be good to work with central government and officers to try and minimise that as much as possible. And it all seems to come down to funding again. It's all about money. It's all about the 300% extra cost it costs us to build houses. If we can't have housing here and we can't provide jobs here, how are we going to get people here? So again, without being too depressing, it's pretty depressing, really. That's it, thank you.
Can I just come back about the comment about BN?
Can I just ask Nicola if she'd like to answer?
I don't think there's any questions there with Dan. I think that what Dan's explained is that, you know, it's a challenge, isn't it? That's our challenge, and we work in a very difficult environment, but the planning context is positive.
Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, just an addition to what Dan was saying about biodiversity net gain, BNG. We are currently going through local nature recovery strategy documentation, and as part of that, there's also marine nature recovery strategy, which is, I think, I'm careful, Harry may well have stronger details on this, but I think it's not mandatory, or it's advisory, is it not? So.
Yeah, it's a voluntary framework for marine. I'm not sure how that's relevant to this.
Well, the point I'm coming on to is the fact that as part of that workshop, we spoke about BNG in the sea, which I just want to highlight here, because obviously we have a lot of sea adjacent, and we have a lot of, so it may well be we have an opportunity to investigate BNG in a different manner than we currently do. That's all I wanted to say.
Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't think Nicola answered Councillor Williams' question on progress on the old museum site.
I think I did. I think I said that we were waiting on the award of the main contract for the town hall, and that would allow us to release the lease on the old museum site, and then it would be brought forward. Apologies if I didn't cover that.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you.
Councillor Dean.
Yeah, I forgot to say earlier to thank Diana from the Duchy for providing us with a statement. Unfortunately, she couldn't attend. We were a bit late asking her, weren't we? But she did send a little report down, which is much appreciated. And I do have a lot of sympathy for. Well, sometimes I have a lot of sympathy for the Duchy of Cornwall, because we find ourselves in the same position as them sometimes. There are properties that are incredibly difficult to bring up to the required standard in order for them to be relet. So if they're an existing rental, you kind of get away with it, but when it comes up for reletting, you have to meet the current standards, which for some of their properties is practically impossible. We do need to push them on what they're going to do with those properties, though, and that's a conversation we had with Natalie before when she was the Deputy Land Steward, because there's nothing more frustrating for people on the islands to see properties just left vacant and deteriorating. And if the Duchy can't bring them up to standard, they need to do something else with them, whether that's sell them off, knock them down, build something else, I don't know, whatever, but we can't allow that to happen. My final point, I think Russell's going to come in a minute as well, but my final point is that there is some optimism, and let's not forget that the new government has promised to build new houses, so let's keep pushing them, because we're ready to go, you know, so we just need a bit of help financially, and if they're true to their word, we can do it. So there is a bit of optimism.
Yes, just to explain about the Duchy, I was reading the paper and it had a sudden thought that perhaps I should have asked Diana to the meeting. but it was very late, and I spoke to Nicola and I spoke to Tim. She was unable to come. She's otherwise occupied today, but she has sent this for us all to read. So that's where that's come from. Right. Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Tim covered a couple of the items I was just going to come in and cover, but definitely just going back to what Tim said at the end, the message we give to civil servants every time we're talking to them when they come to the islands, when we're speaking to Homes England, we have got schemes that are ready. It's the funding that is the issue. So we are pushing that through repeatedly to them whenever we are in contact with them. That we showed them again, as you know, Tim, you were with us, that this site is ready to go. We just need the funding. Just going back, and I agree. I think there are some opportunities. And you've covered in some, and I'm sure it's probably covered in the note that Diana's given you, but just coming back in a little bit of defence of Dutchy, we do discuss with Dutchy on a regular basis the housing issues. You've got to remember there's a couple of things that are, there are a couple of things that it's worth just mentioning. Obviously, the Dutchy, they're not a public authority. They do have tight targets set by the Treasury on how they invest their money, so they're not there to give it away. They do, so you do have to bear that in mind. But on the back of that, we've got empty properties, as you know. We put pressure on them. I know that they get other pressure, and it comes from Kensington Palace, and HRH knows of these vacant properties by name and is always chasing down the Dutchy about what they are going to do with them. So they get a lot of pressure locally, right from the very, very top, far more pressure than I can put on them. But on the other hand, they are properties that are struggling to be converted to the standards that are needed for a modern house. And as we all know, we've mentioned it already, the standards are forever changing and improving and increasing. That if you are a landlord, you have to comply with this, this, and this. I think it's a bit of a shock sometimes when some of those Dutchy houses on the off islands come up for vacant, that people have actually been living in them. Just say that I know our Director of Public Health has the same problems, that some of our housing is woefully poor, which could give a health problem, and that is actually some of the vacant properties are a result of that. Is that once they become vacant, it's obvious that they shouldn't actually have been living there, probably in a modern world. But just going to the cost of building, Nicola has said, and when we've been doing the latest bids to Home England, it's now triple the price of building on the mainland in West Cornwall. And they say West Cornwall is at the end of the supply chain, is expensive. Our message that we're putting very strongly back to government is we need to be able to build at the same price as you can on the mainland. Now, however you achieve that, okay, but there are a number of ways you can achieve that. You can put big subsidies into individual schemes, or you can try to address what's driving up the cost in the first place, which is where we're putting a lot of pressure at the moment, i.e. the cost of transport and the cost of doing business on the islands. It needs to be the same as it is on the mainland, in our view. Nicola again mentioned very briefly second homes council tax. The premium is coming in. That's something that the government introduced about 18 months ago. The legislation went through. It was first mooted long before then. I mean, that is to try and bring back some of the second homes back into normal usage by putting that premium on and either driving people to release the second homes or find alternative use for them, and give us some income that may go towards being able to invest in new or different properties. And I think the positive side of things as well is that I mentioned Dutchy earlier. They've got the 10 houses they've got permission for up at Telegraph. I get the message that may not be the end of their appetite to build new houses, so that's positive. Holiday lets, I think the bubble may have burst from the post-COVID era of everyone going for holiday lets and Airbnbs. I think both here and on the mainland, particularly around the coastal areas on the mainland, beginning to see a slow drift back now to longer-term lets. So again, that will hopefully bring a few premises back into use. So I think there are some things that are being positive, but I also just put the wariness there that I think people need to be wary of timescales. I think people are frustrated. 2022, I think 2 years later, people are saying, well, what have we achieved? But from absolutely out, you know, the very beginning of a concept of putting new houses in to the day that people start moving in, there is a long time scale in that. It's a long process. It doesn't happen overnight, and we just need to be aware of that and be patient. And hopefully these other things, such as the release of holiday let second homes, some of the existing houses we've got planning permission for, take the pressure off in the short term.
Thank you. Any more questions from anybody? Anything you would like to say, Nicola? No. Okay. Take the recommendation that members note the findings within the report and discuss any further actions they consider the council can undertake to support housing delivery on the islands. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Dean, seconder. Councillor Marcus, all those in favour? Thank you. Agenda item 6, Climate Adaptation Scilly Project, Phase 1. Nicola.
Thank you, Chairman. So in the context of it's impossible to deliver anything on the islands, we come to a project which was actually delivered. So at least phase 1 has been achieved. So I think, you know, we can all be critical of projects, but to actually look at this report in the eyes of what the outcomes were at the start and whether they've been achieved, you know, it gives us a nod to the fact that we've actually succeeded in a lot of the outcomes that were expected as part of this project. So in terms of the context, this was a really important project in terms of protecting the islands for the next 25 years, protecting residents, businesses, but also the environment and in particular water supplies. And crucially for me, it didn't use any council funding. It relied on European and Environment Agency funding. And, you know, even now we've still not had to put any funds in from the council itself. So whilst the original budget, as you'll see, astronomically increased from just over 3.5 million to over 11 million. And that was due to a lot of impacts, including COVID and inflation and island waiting and challenges. That funding increase was achieved through good negotiations with the funders, Environment Agency and the European ERDF programme. Both increased their funding to ensure there was still a complete funding package for the project. The project itself covered 5 work streams, so it was very varied and a wide range of work was undertaken and geographically wide ranging as well across the islands. With the intention of protecting areas from coastal flooding, coastal erosion, and protecting, as I say, businesses, water supplies and ecology. The report sets out the achievements, which include flood protection and decreased erosion, potentially, depends on what happens to the climate, of course. But in terms of outcomes for those funders, so in terms of clawback from funders, the funders' outcomes have been met. We have got a second phase of the project to do, which we'll work on once capacity allows. We've had to pause it because of the amount of work on island at the moment, and there is still some money in the pots to continue works. And you'll see in the feedback, both from the summative assessment, which is done for European funding, which is like an independent appraisal of the project, and general feedback, there's a number of lessons learned that can be carried forward both into phase 2, but also into other projects on the island. I think this one in particular was challenged by some of that regulatory environmental complexity, if you like. It needed, I think, 7 different types of licenses to do some of the works, including the Marine Management Organisation, planning and others, including the Duchy, to get licences and permissions in place. So I think that did drag the project a little in terms of the complexity of delivery. The resources from the project team were really too limited, I think, and part of the lessons learnt for me is on a project of this size, you've got to have a really reasonable size project team working on behalf of the council or as council, so council employees or contractors that work to the council to help us deliver projects effectively and to sign works off with the knowledge that the work's of the right standard. And I think there's a clear need for more focus on communication, and that's almost a direct result of the lack of resources within the team. So I think you can always improve communication, but on this one in particular, because it was such a technical project in terms of what the technical solutions had to be, putting that into plain English and listening to the locals' view on things, their experience of life on the islands and storms in the past, that takes time, and it needs time in order to take people with you on projects of this nature. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned in this project that we'll take forward. But there's also a lot to be grateful for in terms of what was achieved, because despite all those things, all the outcomes were achieved in the first phase of the project. So yes, there's work to do. Yes, there's lessons learned. But I think we sometimes beat ourselves up a little bit, and I think there's a lot to be recognised as good within this project, but also lots of lessons learned. And I think to me, a lot of it is around that amount of resource required to take projects forward and to communicate effectively with the communities involved, because, as I say, geographically quite challenging and therefore more difficult to get those communications across to all those affected. So I've set out recommendations set out on page 79 to note the outcomes and to consider the lessons learnt. But I'm sure Councillor Harry Legg will want to make some comments on the project as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Harry.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to the officers for the report. It's a very good report that covers a very large project. Just listening to the other items that we've had today, there seems to be a sort of common thread running through of a sort of minimum viable product, looking at the islands as a whole. So we had discussions earlier about the cost for providing the minimum service for children that's required, and then we've talked about the amount of housing needed to keep the islands going with workers, looking at changing demographics. And then in this project, we talked about the management team and the fact that because it was a large project for the islands, we needed perhaps a larger project team than we had. And I think whilst we have achieved what we set out to achieve, and we should be grateful for that, I think, as Nicola said, the technical expertise of the islanders shouldn't be underestimated. I remember at the start of the project, the discussions about materials being brought in the winter, and that was quickly realised that that wasn't going to work, which the islanders were saying from the very start. And I think that the timelines of everything are also something that we should consider as a lesson learned, that actually sometimes, whilst deadlines can be tight, taking it slower and making sure you have good designs in place first can provide a more cost-effective solution that doesn't necessarily take more time. Getting licenses in place first, yes, can delay a project, but I'm reminded of having a meeting in June, 1 week before we had a meeting scheduled, just to get the planning permission in, because it was costing us tens of thousands of pounds a day in delay. So saving a week could save large sums. as mentioned, this project hasn't finished yet, and it's a shame that we still have work left to do. I mean, the nature of sea defences are such that you never know when you might need them. Hopefully, in 2 weeks' time, we won't need the ones that haven't been done. But we just don't know. We've just had Storm Dara, which I wasn't on the islands for, but I hear was not as eventful as it was on the mainland. At that point, I'll open the floor to questions.
Thank you. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Nicola on this 99-page report. It's pretty concise and in-depth paper, and no project such as this size is ever 100% successful. I mean, one example, actually, to move that forward, it hasn't actually been really tested yet to see if it is effective, because we haven't had any major storms from the southeast. Not yet. Fingers crossed we don't get them. Just a comment on paragraph 31. She mentions the increased incidence of fog. Now, some members may already realise or remember that I do keep a log of every morning. The papers don't turn up over several years. And this year so far, you may be interested to know, it's 61. Not all fog, sometimes it's strong winds, but most of it is fog. And Stephen Swaby took my figures away, and he's written an academic paper. I haven't actually seen the finished one yet. I've seen the draft version, so something else is coming out of this project, not just sea defence.
I don't know who was next. Councillor Williams, please.
Oh, your fog log sounds really. I'm looking forward to seeing that paper too at some point. But I was just going to say, I think Nicola's absolutely right. We are really, really good at sort of breaking ourselves, and our Christmas party could be the most mournful experience ever for some people. But I think generally this project is on time, on budget, and I don't doubt has been incredibly complex. I think the extra protection it offers is obviously a positive, but again, as Steve alluded to, we've still got to test some of that. I think visually, some of it's blended in better than others. In some places, I've really forgotten what it looked like previous to the work being doing. In other places, it is quite noticeable, but I'm sure we'll get used to that. The road at Old Town turned into a bit of a saga. It seemed to be, on the outset, one of the more straightforward logistically to achieve, but it seemed to be 8 or 9 months of work, and I don't even know if it's completed yet. I was going to ask a question about the demountables. Have we actually done a full dress rehearsal? I assume we've got everything, all the sort of grooves are in place, but I've never actually seen them in place. So again, before the storm comes, it would just be good to be reassured that they are all fitting and all the skills and expertise and technical stuff is there for putting them all together for when it's required. There was always this sort of query, again, it was a meeting I was raising with the Duchy, that we were paying a significant amount in landing fees, or whatever the technical term is, for protecting their land. Again, moving into phase 2, it would be good if more money could be put into the actual mechanics of the sea defence rather than some of those fees. It just seemed to be a bit topsy-turvy, and didn't really shout partnership approach when we were having those conversations. I don't know if, Nicola, you could talk a bit more about ongoing capacity, budget, phase 2, what our timescales are for that going forward. And the other shout out was just in relevance to this. I'm occasionally stopped and drawn attention to that little road near the play park at Porth Cressa, which leads out to the allotments, and there's a house and a path out to Penniness. It seems to have some rock armour, and where the rock armour has ended, it seems like that road is getting more and more vulnerable, and residents in that area ask questions. So whether that's in phase 2 or whether some short-term temporary response could be considered for that area, but it's got some public interest in there.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Joel. So a few questions in there. In terms of the demountables and training for Eddie's team, they were all trained up when the road was closed. I was going to say last month, but it's a month before that when the final works, the concrete was redone. The Eddie's team went down there with the manufacturers and did a training session. So they did a dry run, literally a dry run, of installing the demountables and making sure they fitted and they knew how to fit them. So I suppose, you know, they've done the training. It's when they actually have to put it into effect under storm conditions that we'll see whether they work effectively. But yes, Eddie's team have now received the training, and they've got their drills ready for when needed. In terms of landing fees, I think that's another one where we just need to talk to the Duchy. Again, as Russell said, they're not a non-for-profit organisation, and so part of the project costs do need to take account of landing fees. So it is a tricky one. We keep making representations, but yeah, in true partnership, you'd think they might be able to contribute, and probably further discussions ought to be had with the Duchy in relation to how we work in partnership to protect the land. I think in terms of the next phase, we are scoping out what that work will include, and one of the areas we're looking at is that road to the allotments at Porth Cresser, whether that ought to be included. So we need to see what we can get in terms of bang for our buck. We've got a limited budget left. We also need to make sure we put the right resources in place, and we're currently recruiting a member of staff for flood risk management, and we're hoping that we'll have some project management skills within that person's skill set to work with others to build up a small team to do the next phase of works. But as you say, I think rather than doing it all at once, it's better to bite it down to bite-sized chunks. The original funding was dependent on expenditure through the European programme by June 23. The environment agency funding hasn't got the same time constraints. So I think provided we keep a dialogue going, we can probably do that in more bite-sized chunks and put the right team in place for each phase of the project. But we'll come back to you around what that's looking like. The environment agency aren't expected to start that work until 2026, but I'd like to spend next year planning that work to make sure we make something that's deliverable with the community, with the right resources in place and within the budget we've got. So I think there's further work to do as we enter 2025 to make sure we make something that's deliverable in a way that suits our setup. Let's put it like that. So it's on our terms, if you like, and we put the right team in place to deliver it at a pace that's appropriate for the resources that we've got on the island.
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Sims.
Yeah, this is we referred to the clip below the allotments, and on the exact other side, below Trinity Cottages, there's been a lot of earth. A lot of ram has fallen down this year. It wasn't storms, it was just waterlogged, and there's been loads of it. And I have no, I mean, presumably, maybe somebody does know how you could get rock armour below the allotment beaches, but I just don't see how you couldn't get a landing craft in there, and there's no vehicle access, and it's similar below Trinity Cottages. And it's a testament to how effective rock armour is where it goes in, because it doesn't happen. Just in terms of lessons learned, I think one for the Environment Agency is don't object to your own planning application, because Abby's just alluded to that. That was somewhat bizarre. And I think another, this is going to sound like I'm being critical, and I don't really wish to be, because Stephen got the money. But if he hadn't got the money, we would have a very, very different scrutiny meeting now. One of the lessons learned is try and get your estimate somewhere ballpark rather than 25% of what the total cost is. And if he hadn't got the money, this would, as I said, this would be a very, very different meeting. But he did, and that's great. But that is a definite lesson learned. But it should be learned, rather.
Thank you. Councillor.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come in on that point? Because I think just to defend him, he came in with the budget that had already been allocated, and it was down to Stephen's work that unpicked those costs, that worked out that the budget was insufficient. So he was given a lemon basically at the start of the project. So yeah, I mean, we can lay blame in various places, can't we? But I think the lesson learned is to get that design and costs as close as possible to what the actual costs are going to be. And that means you've got to work at pace from getting those original quotes in to getting the work out to tender and delivered, because the longer that gap is, the more likely you're going to see significant increases in costs.
I wasn't actually blaming Stephen. He did a marvellous job, but but as an holistic point, it's worth noting as a lesson to be learned.
Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on a couple of things, but I think most people have actually picked up on the points I wanted to raise. But again, I've had representations from residents about Porthcressa and that area you're talking about. I've not been to look at it myself, but
Below Trinity.
Below Trinity in that area around there, near the sewage outfall area as well. There was a bit of scratching heads why there was nothing going in there. Pick up on Harry's point as well. I think engaging with the community on phase 2 at a very early stage, excuse me, go away, very early stage would be really, really important, because I think there is some local knowledge on the islands which I think designers tend to think there isn't, to be harsh to the designers. And it's not necessarily their fault, but it's everybody's fault, really. So I think communication around that is really important. So I would suggest, yeah, for phase 2, my first point would be get the designer onto the island, speak to the residents, especially anybody with any knowledge of, try not to say myself here, but anybody with any knowledge of local operations with barges is really important, because it turned out that having spoken to the skipper of the TMS barge, we could have got significantly more stuff into St Agnes if he'd had a conversation with other people on the islands, which he didn't, because he didn't know we existed. So there's that. Again, I think I was going to raise the funding, and is that forevermore? In other words, is there no drop-dead date on that? And it sounds like you've said that there isn't an issue with the funding. Because obviously for ICIT, we need to get moving on this if there's a funding drop-dead date, which I don't think you said there was. And finally, I think phase 2 hasn't necessarily been communicated very well to the community. I wasn't aware until reading the report there was a phase 2, and I think the general feeling on St Agnes was that what we had was it, because I know there was some concern around where the barge came in. Locally around the damage to that area if we happen to get a storm. But I'm pleased to see in the report that you're actually looking at doing that section in phase 2. I just querying, can we get some comms out around a possible phase 2 and possible timelines for that? Just really low level. I'm not talking about we will be on island on March 26th or anything like that, but just give us an idea of what's happening. And finally, just on St Agnes, I walked round the site 2 weeks ago after one of the big storms. There was literally no rubbish, water or anything around the Peculiar, not Pacouth site. So that has worked really well. There was no overtopping at all. However, at Peculiar there was significant overtopping just beyond where the work had been completed. So I think that would be worth picking up in phase 2 as well. And I think that's it from me. But I say for me, it's making sure that residents are aware there is a phase 2 coming along.
Thank you. Councillor.
Can I just come in on that? Because I think there's a date. I'm just going to raise a little red flag of danger here. We have got a very limited amount of funding left within that original grant funding to do a phase 2. So we need to be very careful about any promises about what that might achieve moving forward. So with less than £2 million and already an increasing list of asks, we've got to be really careful, and we've got to decide where that's going to go, how best to spend that money. And I think the project board that we had previously will need to sit down with ourselves once the team's set up to work out what we think those priorities might be, what the funders require us to do, and then we talk to the community about and manage that expectation. The last thing I want to do is let the communities think there's going to be a second phase and there's an open checkbook here, because it's a very limited checkbook and already a list of things that need to be done for the funders to tick their boxes, but also in terms of those new priorities that have come to the fore. So a little red flag from me to say, actually, it's probably best that people don't think there's a phase 2 coming to yet, because it'll be a very limited scope of works with the funding we've got left to do it with. So just to sort of manage expectations there a little bit. As saying, once we've got a project team in place, one of the things we'll be picking up on is how we do that comms and how we work through that scope of works.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yes, for me, it's worth focusing back on like the issues around the project and how we can make it better. The project started off was estimated at 3.5 million and it ended up at 11.5 million. So obviously there's going to be some public interest around that. And I think Nicola's covered why those costs were increased so much. It's covered in the report, talks about logistics and general. In the report, it says 150% increase in capital costs, but in the previous paper, we heard 300% costs for increase for housing. So there's just a massive inflation that the islands cause for projects. It's also worth reiterating that the cost benefit analysis for the project estimated £60 million worth of properties and of assets being protected by these works. So whether that cost benefit, I'm sure we looked at it previously, and I'm sure I can't criticise that. But it's worth just remembering that that was an outcome of the project. And for me, it's interesting looking at page 148, 149, when the evaluation reports talks about value for money, and it's quite woolly, the answers there that were given in the survey results. So and we've talked about value for money all the way through this meeting, whether it's in children's services or housing delivery or something like that. I think it'd be really good if we can get more concrete on what actually is value for money for the islands, because it's not the same as it is for the mainland. So because we've got extra expenses there. So if we can, one thing I would, the two things that come out for lessons learned are resources and money for me. So if we can nail the value for money bits, and it's good that we're talking to civil servants and ministers about that, but we need to really have some concrete terms that we can use in order to sell that. And these keep changing for me all the way through this meeting. So that'd be my challenge to officers, is to go away and come back and help us get that value for money metric really nailed.
Thank you.
Can I come back there, Chairman? Yes. So value for money, what is it? Value for money depends on what funding you're going for and what methodology they use for calculation of value for money. So some projects will use benefits cost ratios, some will use outputs and outcomes. So each funding stream has its own methodology around how it calculates value for money. And of course, the public perception of value for money is different to what a funder's perception is as well. So, yeah, it's a great question, Dan. I'm not sure we'll get a single answer, but it's a tricky one. We've had the same with Shared Prosperity Fund. The calculation around value for money is not a simple one, and the methodology changes depending on the funding stream. And Anne's probably got a completely different methodology for value for money for children's services as well. So, yeah, it's invented by the grant funders often, and but we need to sing to that tune depending on the funding stream. So it's a tricky one to answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I totally get it, but the factors beneath the value for money are the same, aren't they? So it's just explaining them in the right way.
Councillor Dean.
Yeah, thanks. Nicola, thanks for your very honest appraisal at the beginning. It's quite refreshing to hear that you were so open about some of the issues we have had with this project. I mean, overall, I have to say, before I start moaning about it, the outcomes have been pretty good, and the big stuff seems to have worked really well. What I think it's already been mentioned. I think comms was an issue yes, you could put that down to the size of the team, but there was some public engagement and there was some public expertise sought, and it certainly felt like it wasn't accepted very well by the project manager. You know, he did listen, but he didn't seem to take any notice, which that was the perception of a lot of the community. So that would need to be addressed, I think, in phase 2. The other thing about lessons learned, and it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, is the sign-off of works. Now, some of the demountable works that were done at the end of the project were, you know, quite frankly, pretty poor. And the contractor did the work and walked away, and the, you know, the outcry from the public, quite rightly, was, "Oh my God, what the hell's happened here?" So there needs to be, in my mind, there needs to be a process for all projects that the council manages, all the work that that the council does, to make sure that work is done to a decent standard and is not allowed to be finished until it is done to that standard. We've had, you know, going off topic, we've had issues with corporate estate stuff as well, you know, so it's that clerk of works role within the council, or on a project you need someone working for the council who's got some kind of knowledge that is able to say, you know, this is not okay, you've got to do this to a decent standard. So that's a very important lesson in my mind. The only question I've got, well, there's one question and one remark, is about the ongoing cost of maintenance. So I know the groove in the road at Old Town, I just happened to witness yesterday a council employee go up there and sweep it out, which is I'm really glad they're doing that, because that's maintaining it. But I wondered what the ongoing cost was for any other bits of the project that need to be maintained. And there's also the drainage channel that was dug out on Porthlow, you know, where the water pools as it comes down from Juliet's garden there. There was a channel dug through there at one point. I specifically drove past there this morning to have a look, and it doesn't seem to be there anymore. So that's going to cause a flooding issue at the bottom of the hill, I think. So is that down to us, and have we budgeted that into, or put that in the scheme of works for the council stuff? So that's the question. The other thing I just wanted to highlight as well, Joel mentioned it already, and I think Steve did as well, about the state of the road by the play park going up to the allotments on Peninis. And it does, I have gone and had a look at it, and it does seem to me that it's, I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, but it seems that it could be repaired fairly, I mean, nothing's cheap, is it? But it could be repaired quite well, quite quickly, quite cheaply now, or we leave it for 2, 3, 4 years, and then it's a major project to get rock armour in there somehow or whatever, and repair that. But it's, if we don't do it, I think we're in trouble, because I believe that road has been adopted by the council, and, you know, if it erodes away, we've got to find another way to get to those 2 houses. So that's the comment. So yeah, the question was about ongoing maintenance and repair.
Yeah, so the project itself has funding secured for maintenance for up to 4 years at the end of the project. So there is a little bit of money in there to help with those ongoing costs for the foreseeable future. So that was built in to the project. In terms of the Porthaloo one in particular, that drainage channel, it's not an issue that was created by the project, it's a highways issue. So we'll need to pick that up as part of the highways work. And it was the highways team that sort of built that, that redug the drainage there. But it's about the council's responsibilities, I suppose, as highway authority. And we just need to make sure that we maintain some of those pieces of road and assets. And that's the other thing for the thing at the play park at near the allotments, is we could just use our own capital funding now. And I think that's a decision we need to have a think about, is if a stitching time saves 9, then maybe it's better to do it out of our capital programme now, and then we know we've got the certainty of delivery. So I think we've got some decisions to make around what we do with the capital programme as well, and about where those pieces of work are really important and urgent, and we ought to just crack on. So 2 answers. 1, yes, we've got maintenance in the budget for the next 4 years, and 2, do we need to move some of our capital funding around to make sure we secure the highways in the allotments? And I think that's a live debate at the moment.
Councillor Sims.
Just referring back to the play park and the allotment bit, I mean, this has been a conversation that's been going on for a while. And when I first got on the council, I did discuss it with, I can't remember who it was, but the problem with getting rock armour below the play park is the plan. It's really, really heavy, and you could do more damage putting the rock armour in than actually not putting the rock armour in. And below the allotments, I don't see how you can do it unless you use a Chinook or have trebuchets hurling rocks from Crescent Bank, because there's no access to it. So, and if you do it by helicopters, I mean, that's just going to cost astronomical amounts. So it's an issue, but sometimes you think, well, perhaps you've got to let things go a little bit because it costs too much. I just want to, just referring back to the barrier at Old Town. Now, we haven't had this big southerly or southeasterly into Old Town for quite a while now. Now, when it happens, and obviously the barrier will go up, is there still a plan to put some bags of aggregate there as well? Because it may well be a good idea, because we don't actually know how effective it's going to be until it happens. So,
yes, thanks, Steve. I think Eddie and the team have held on to those bags for just such an occasion. So I think for now we need to prove that they work, don't we? But I trust in Eddie and the team to deploy the right defences at the right time. And as soon as we get a test of those defences, we'll deploy everything that they've got to make sure we keep properties safe. But I'll pass those comments on to Eddie. But I'm pretty sure he's kept all the kit we've already had.
Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just two very brief points. First of all, Dan mentions about value for money and how it's estimated. From memory, I recall that the original estimate was only, 3.5 million, and then it increased to 11 something. The original estimate was made by the Environment Agency, and it was based on the danger to properties, which is one of the reasons why Tresco was left off. Not because there aren't expensive properties on Tresco, but it's talking principally about Appletree Bay, where there are no buildings, and so Tresco was left out. I remember Councillor Mike Nellams making that point quite strongly. He was quite incensed that Tresco had been left off. And the second point, briefly, on the allotments erosion, I'm a chairman of the Allotments Association, and we've come to the conclusion that it's managed decline. And we've moved 2 footpaths already, or 1 footpath twice, rather, away from the edge. So I think it's inevitable, basically. As you say, about moving rock armour. I remember when in 1962-63, when that corner of Porthcressa, there was a huge amount of granite pulled up into that corner. It was done by landing craft, dumping it down, and then it was dragged up by block and tackle. I know, because I worked on it with George Simmons, and we dragged it back up onto the bank. But it is, the further east you go, though, or south you go, along that cliff side, towards the allotment, it becomes more and more difficult. In fact, or probably impossible, as you said.
Okay.
Can I just butt in there? I'm not talking about the allotments, not talking about protecting the allotments. I agree with you that I think that there's not much we can do there. It's about the access to those 2 houses there that are tucked back before you get to the allotments. So the bit right by the play park, that kind of, that turning bit, and just before it, that's where the issue is, and that's where I think we could get ourselves in a lot of bother if that falls into the sea. And I take your point, it's not easy, but and I take Steve's point as well, that you've got to get stuff up there and you could damage the road, but the road is pretty poor at the moment as well. So but I'm just highlighting it, that's all.
Okay. Councillor Legg.
I think there's, when we've got a flood risk manager in post, it would be good to have a workshop on this. I'm also just thinking about the fact there was 2 other strands to this project, one being the rainwater harvesting systems, and the other being the Resilient Island Strategy, or the Climate Adaptation Action Plan. And on discussions of value for money, I do wonder about the £250,000 that was spent on the rainwater harvesting systems. Perhaps I misunderstand something, but I think the FIPL funding, which allows farmers to get, amongst other things, rainwater harvesting systems, seems to provide about a 10 times more capacity per pound than this system did. That's not to say that there aren't other benefits to this system, and the fact that it was open to more businesses than just farmers, but it is something we should perhaps look more closely at. And if we were to do this again, perhaps there are other ways that we could approach that. On the Resilient Island strategy, I think it's something that we really need to consider when looking at the local plan review. There's a lot of adaptation recommendations within it. Not all are negative. There will be some bonuses to a changing climate. And it's something that we need to continue partnership working on, especially with the Duchy of Cornwall. It may be worth having a stakeholder meeting to consider the long-term strategic approach to the islands to ensure continued resilience. I don't know if there was a question buried amongst all that.
Just to pick up on the sort of how do we take the Resilient Islands strategy forward, I think it all sits under the Climate Action Plan as well. So there is a lot of work still to do there. And I think you're right. Again, it's in partnership, and it's perhaps one of the areas that the Island Futures Board could look at about how we work jointly to solve some of these bigger issues for the islands.
Councillor Sims.
I just wanted to ask about Paul Panic. Now, we went up Paul Panic, it was February last year, and it was pretty grim. It was the winter. There was very little vegetation there. It looked quite ugly. But my thought was at the time that when we get to May, vegetation kicks in, it would have probably stabilised the situation. But unforgivably, I've not been back to Paul Panic since. And I just wondered if anybody's been up there and has it sort of done what it's meant to have done.
Nicola?
I've been up there. I think it's doing what it's supposed to do. I say we haven't had the big storms to test it properly yet. I think one of the things we're looking at is where the matting it gets exposed and then comes off. The idea was that would decompose. It was biodegradable, and probably at the start of the season we'll probably get the ops team just to pop down there and clear up any residual matting from the winter season. So I think probably in terms of making it look tidy for visitors, there's one thing, and is it working is another thing. Making it look tidy for visitors, I think Eddie and the team will go down and clear up at the start of the season. But it's at the moment it's doing what it's supposed to do. But I think only time will tell. A lot of these things they need testing, and it's not a single test, is it? It's about time and time again. So we won't know the answer to the questions for a little while, but yeah, we've got our eyes on. Seems to be working at the moment, but there is some matting that needs clearing up.
Yeah, and when I said it was ugly, that wasn't a criticism. The assumption was that the vegetation would beautify the beach, and I hope it has.
Thank you. No more questions?
Not a question, Chair. Earlier on we talked about sort of landing fees, and I've heard talk through the Natural Landscapes Partnership of potential landing fees for landing craft going into the off-islands, which would have impacted on this project had they been in place. I just think any discussions about that in future should suggest that infrastructure projects would be exempt from those costs.
Any more comments? Take the recommendations. Recommendation 1, that members note the outcomes of the climate adaptation SILI project. Recommendation 2, that members consider the lessons learned from this project and determine if there is any other action required by full council in this respect. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Legg and seconder. Councillor Watt, all those in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicola. We now come on to internal audit. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. How are you all?
Fine, thank you. Would you like to?
I'll just run through the internal audit pack that's been presented with these papers. Just to note the current status, we've been first, the reports that sets out the work which you've been working on at the moment or recently completed. That includes the Cultural Centre and Museum project, which, as you know, and in line with my reports to previous meeting, we're sort of tracking and work sort of in the background on that, just ensuring that it's all being managed appropriately, and very impressed with how Nicola and the team are handling that. And I know that obviously we've got the specific Cultural Centre and Museum project broad, which goes into much more depth and provides detailed reports. So we have no specific concerns, basically because there's such a thorough and good governance structure in place. But obviously we note that the cost challenges which have been talked about in line with previous items on the agenda are equally applicable to the Cultural Centre and Museum project and are proving to be somewhat challenging at the moment. But it's also very pleasing to note that Nicola and the team are fully on top of those and working with the funders to ensure that there's a managed position going forward to enable the project to be delivered on time and hopefully in line with a revised budget. So that's really one we're sort of tracking rather than reporting on in terms of a formal audit report. We'll be planning on issuing a summary report for the end of this financial year, 31st of March, just to sum up the work and the current status. Then moving on to the 3 reports, which I think I mentioned were draft at the previous meeting, which have all been subsequently finalised with input in particular from Russell and also Tom and other members of the team, that being cybersecurity, risk management and information governance. So each of these reports came out with some sort of useful findings. No major concerns on the cyber side. A couple of areas for improvement to note, particularly in terms of our recommendations on training for officers and members. And we'll be sort of looking at that after the election of the new team and members next May in particular. Risk management, also a reasonable conclusion. The work was carrying on from the previous work we'd sort of done a couple of years earlier, and noting that the risk register is now being given greater prominence, as we'll come on to in a subsequent item in this committee. And it's very, very good that there is proper sort of buy-in and obviously awareness of what the key risks are, and ensuring that sort of mitigation strategies are being put in place where appropriate. In terms of information governance, this was looking at the overall compliance with GDPR. Again, it's another opinion of one of reasonable assurance, but we did note a couple of priority findings to cover the storage of personal data on the Y drive, and also updating all the policies and procedures that relate to information governance. So as part of the response to those reports, there is an action plan and timeline to address those matters. So those are the key points which we're raising in terms of the reports that have been delivered to date. And going on to the plans for the rest of the year, we have a couple more reviews in the pipeline. The first being recruitment and onboarding. I'm drafting out the terms of reference for that review at the moment, which is really going to be looking at starters, leavers, the process for onboarding them, making sure that the recruitment and selection process is robust. but we also sort of want to build into that the sort of obviously key stats like turnover, vacancies, and the use of contractors and temporary staff as part of that review as well. So that's one which we're planning on kicking off in January. The last review which we have planned for the year is the annual review of financial systems, which provides the assurance over key financial controls, particularly on the sort of the purchasing side. So we tend to look at sort of samples of purchase orders, controls over those orders, invoicing, and so forth. So that's sort of really giving assurance on the financials controls, which gives assurance across to the external auditors who provide their opinion on the financial numbers, the balance sheet and the profit and loss source of funds for the year. So that's basically what we're delivering in terms of the internal audit program for this year and what the plans for the remaining 2 to 3 months. So really, are there any questions on this report, please?
Anybody got any questions? Councillor Sims.
No, I think I say this quite a lot. I mean, I think essentially it's interesting that we haven't got that many questions because it seems what you're saying seems to be broadly favourable. Regarding your optimism regarding the Cultural Centre and Museum project, I will wear that as virtual rock armour when I go to the meeting in Truro tomorrow. We need fortifying on this one.
Well, I don't want to sort of preempt, obviously, a detailed discussion on that. It's not the place and time in this meeting for that. But I think Nicola and the team are doing as good a job as is possible. But we know from the previous reports that tabled at this meeting, the challenges are huge in terms of funding and cost management.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for your reassurance that we're reassuring you that we're doing everything we can for the Cultural Centre and Museum project to get there. And the only other thing is I'm looking forward to your appraisal of the recruitment and onboarding thing. I think that'll be quite interesting because it's an area that we struggle with, so that'll be interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else to say, Chris? No?
No, I've got nothing else to add, thank you.
Right, could we take the recommendation, please? Members to note the internal audit progress report. Could I have a proposer? Councillor Peacock, seconder, Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. See you next meeting.
Thank you. I'll just stay on for the next item for performance and risk management because clearly that's pertinent for the work which we've just been discussing.
Okay, thank you. Right, agenda item 8, Council Performance Summary and Corporate Risk Register. Could I ask Linda to present this paper?
I won't go through the report in step by step because you should have all had a chance to read that. Attached is the quarterly performance that went to the last full council meeting. It's been brought to you through Scrutiny for you all to have a look at and decide if there are any specific areas that need further scrutiny. And if there are any areas of the report that you think can be improved. I will just say that for Q3, with regard to the performance report, there has been a section added for the housing to be able to record any complaints that they have received. So that will be coming forward in the next quarter.
Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, just reading through the performance stats. Yeah, slightly worrying that we've got some late decisions and planning. I'll try and work with the officers to try and get on top of that so that doesn't happen again. It's worth also noticed that percentage time, working time lost has increased in the quarter. And the other thing, I was looking at the waste stats, and I'm kind of conflicted about this. I mean, we're producing less waste, which is in line with our waste reduction strategy, but I'm also thinking, does that mean there's less activity on the island as well, if there's less waste? So, you know, waste has gone down steadily since 2021, 22. And so the percentage of recycling has as well. But reading the narrative, it looks like we've hit our marks for the corporate plan of reduction of waste and recycling as well. So congratulations, I guess, I think. Yeah, that's it in terms of that.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I think it's a question for Russell. On page 7, we talk about staff vacancies. And historically, we always have quite a few staff vacancies. Nationally, it seems to be 21%. And I'm just wondering at what point we have, when we're having our budget conversations, we have to recognise that it would probably be not a good thing if we had 0 staff vacancies. So at what point do we have to just almost say that we put a line through things?
Yeah, we do carry a number of vacancies. Some of those vacancies are posts that are vacant at a point in time that they were just in the point of recruiting to them, but there are also a number that have been vacant for a longer period, and there's also a number of vacant posts, and it sort of adds up as vacant posts, but it can quite often be bits of posts from across the whole council where there's somebody, there's an arrangement in there that somebody does 32 hours and the post is 37, and there's a whole plethora of those. A piece of work is being looked at as we speak. I've asked HR to look at it to see whether there is a number of these residual bits which can then feed into the budget process. But I do know an approach by other local authorities, sometimes in delivering savings plans, is to remove all vacancies at a certain point in time, collect those as savings, and then create a process for people to rebid, if they so wish, for those posts in the future, but to take them out in the first instance. So that is certainly open to us as we go through the budget process, but we're certainly also looking at all those little bits and pieces that are scattered around and see whether we should take those out on a permanent basis.
Any more questions? I've just got one question. The emergency planning, who's in charge if we have an emergency over here in the council? Is it the most senior officer?
Emergency planning is with the Chief Fire Officer.
Chief Fire Officer. I just wonder, because we haven't got very many senior managers here resident, and our fire officer is not resident either. So what happens if we have an emergency and we've got no senior officer here?
I think that it's probably something that we need to look at and bring back at the time in the future. But the whole structure these days of emergency planning through the LRF, through the police and everything, if you had a major emergency, the chances are it would be run from Middlemore. It wouldn't be run from the island, whether you have a senior officer or not. A lot of these things are now run digitally, online. We will need people on the islands if we need to use our existing workforce to address an emergency. We have those arrangements in place with people on call. We have a senior officer on call through the emergency planning, one of the directors, plus we have other officers on call to take those calls in those instances. But it is something that does need a review to bring it up and bring it forward with the modern world that we live in. As I say, a lot of these instances will now be run digitally through, like we are with a meeting here, people on screens, etc. So we do need to be aware of that. We are also doing a piece of work to update every single emergency planning policy we got. There are a significant number. They are all well out of date. We have had to commission other people to do that piece of work for us. We haven't got the resources, but part of that hopefully will address maybe those issues that how we would deal with a major emergency on Ireland.
Thank you. Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, in the page 203 in the pack, which is Appendix C, it says risk updated June 23, which I assume has been updated since then. Right at the first, literally first page, top there says updated 23. Because obviously it needs to be significantly
Are you thinking?
No, it says literally, it says risk there, updated June 2023.
That was when the actual whole risk register was updated. As you can see, if you look through the register itself, each individual risk is updated on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Work was started in modifying the register in June 2023.
I just wonder whether that's a little bit misleading then.
Absolutely, that can be
I looked
changed,
at that
not
and
a
said
problem.
that we haven't done anything since 2023, which plainly we have.
I think it's a typo thing. We need to look at it. If you'll notice, we've introduced a timestamp against every single risk register item now to make sure that they are updated on a regular basis. We probably, with that now on there, that line on the top is probably needs to be removed.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and the other thing to raise, obviously there was a lot of significant number of red risks on here in the register. So perhaps it would be good to have a last updated date, more than the date quoted there. So we know, because as you look through the risk, I know it's been updated all the time, but when it comes to, when I look at it, it would say, oh, housing, yes, that does that link back to 23, or is that recently been updated? So it'd be useful just to know when that latest entry was put in.
Should be in the right-hand column if it's printed.
Oh, it is. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm with it. It is. Apologies.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Dean.
Just a quickie, just while Nicola's online, just wondered if there was any update on the Integrated Health and Social Care project. I haven't heard anything about it for a little while. Just wondered if they were still on track and it's all going well.
I'm sure Avril can update you as well, but yes, in terms of the physical construction of the site, I don't know if you saw there's some photographs probably we could share after the meeting, Avril, isn't there, around where they're at in terms of the footings, and they're working well on the hospital extension. That comes first, and then the Park House replacement comes second, and that'll start in the new year. So yeah, currently on programme. The integrated care in terms of the workforce planning is in a cycle of change management. Is that the right way to put it, Avril? So there are conversations going with the workforce about how to best integrate the workforce. But in terms of the physical delivery of the project, that is going well at present. I don't want to jinx it, and I'm touching wood.
All good at the moment, Tim.
Just
Councillor Peacock.
Just again, this is probably going completely off track a little bit now, so bear with me. I missed the last meeting of the stakeholder group, which I sit on as the U. But I was a little bit alarmed to see in there that there was a statement around concerns being raised by staff in a couple of places about how the management of the new project is going to be run. And I just want to make sure that we're all over that and making sure that we have strong positions in place.
I think that's will be coming to our next meetings in March.
Pick it up there.
Okay, it's not for this meeting.
Can I just come in there as well? Yes, obviously, I think Nicola alluded to it just now by saying that we're in a process of change management. going through such a significant change. In actual fact, I would be concerned if there wasn't concerns coming up from staff. That would probably be bigger concern, because that means that either for some reason they're not able to voice their concerns, or two, the change is so minimal, which hopefully in this case it isn't, that they haven't any worries. So I welcome the fact that that is coming up, because it actually means that things are happening in that change management programme.
I completely endorse that view as well.
No more questions? Right, can we take the recommendations, please? That members consider the performance summary and risk register for Q2 of the financial year 2024-25 and identify any areas that they feel would benefit from further scrutiny. That members consider the format and content of the performance summary and corporate risk register for Q2 of the financial year 2024-25 and provide feedback on areas where the report can be improved. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Peacock, seconder. Councillor Watt, all those in favour? Thank you very much. We now come to the last agenda item, is the work plan. Linda, do you want to?
Again, this is the work plan that has been updated since we last met, and it's for you guys to go through and see if there is anything you feel needs adding or making any comments on it as is.
Just one comment, that the meeting on March the 18th, it won't be on the 18th because we've got such a large agenda. We're having two meetings. The first one will be on the 11th of March and the second one will be on the 14th of March, which I think should be in your calendars. I think Andy sent them out just to, we haven't done the split yet to see who's going to be in which one. It is going to be quite a long meeting, so
You've just answered my question, because I said there looks to be an awful lot of on for the 18th of March.
yeah, there's a lot on, and
Well, yeah, that's right.
there's something that I've got a meeting tomorrow because, as you know, the chief fire officer is leaving in February, and I had a phone call yesterday from Kevin, and he wants a meeting with me tomorrow, so I'm not quite sure what that's about, but there may be something to come to that one before we Mark Hewitt, yeah. So that might be another one on it. So, Councillor Marcus.
Propose the recommendations.
Right.
I'll second that.
Put me on the hop now. Right, recommendation 1, that members approve the work plan subject to any amendments proposed at this meeting. Could I have a proposer, please? Oh, Councillor Marcus, seconder. Councillor Peacock. All those in favour? Right, just before we finish, I'm going away on Thursday, so I'd like to wish you all a happy Christmas. I shall still have my iPad with me. I hope not to be contacted too much. And I wish you all a happy Christmas and a happy New Year. See you in January.
Thank you, Chairman.